John Fulton Reynolds.
John Fulton Reynolds.
So can you please sit down? So let's start. Please sit down. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good evening, maybe to say good night for our friends from the Ukraine. I'm Jörg Süßenbach. I'm the director of the Goethe Institute here in Boston, and I really would like to welcome you all warmly here in the Goethe Institute in Boston and all others connected from wherever they are. I heard we have a huge attendance from different countries and the US. Well, it's a special night. Exactly 4 weeks ago, the world changed with the invasion of Ukraine. Of course, this also affects the Goethe Institute and especially the Goethe Institute in Kiev, where we had 100 colleagues working there and only a few are still there in Kiev. When we heard that Askold Melnyczuk, well-known Boston-based writer and founding editor of AGNI, Piers Alquist, curator of the transnational literature series at Brookline Booksmith, and Bill Pierce from AGNI as well, all longtime partners of the Goethe Institute, planned a reading with Ukrainian and local authors in Boston. We wanted to support that and offered to host this event here in our house, especially because well, it's only a small contribution, to be sure, especially because we're convinced that the concept and the title, Writers from the Ukraine Speaking to Writers in Boston, all that we have is a voice, convinced us. Today, we are glad that due to the excellent cooperation with all partners, we all managed to prepare this event in such a short time, that so many great and well-known authors participate and that there is so much interest. In this respect, I would like to take the opportunity to thank all our partners, my dear colleague and literature and film curator at the Goethe Institute here in Boston, Karin Oehlenschläger, for the preparation, and the German consulate with whom we have once again an excellent cooperation. The German Consul General, Nicole Metzenbach, will also welcome you soon. But before that, I would like to point out to the guests who would like to make a donation for Ukraine the possibility to do so for the organization Razom for the Ukraine. Razom means together, was founded in the days of the Maidan protests and has good networks for direct help to the artists in the Ukraine and other people as well. The web address is razomforukraine.org and will be put in the chat so you can look it up. So once again, thank you all for your interest and for attending here tonight. And please, the stage for Nicole. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good evening. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you, with all of you. My heartfelt thanks go to all those who helped to make this event happen. My thanks to all the local participants, your being here and lending your distinguished presence to this event brings more attention to the plight of our Ukrainian friends. And my thanks goes out most especially, of course, to the authors joining us from the Ukraine. In these difficult times, it is good to come together and exchange views, fears, and hopes. You should know that our thoughts and prayers are with you as your country is suffering the worst humanitarian crisis in Europe since World War II. When we woke up in the morning of February 24th, 29 days ago, we woke up to a different world. There are certain events that change the course of history, and the war in the Ukraine is indeed such a turning point. Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine has had no historic parallel since World War II, when the last major war broke out on the European continent. Russia's war against Ukraine is an 18th century style land grab by a great power. It is a ruthless attack on a neighbor that cannot be justified. Our event tonight, is titled, All That We Have is a Voice. In the face of Russian propaganda and the military actions taking place, it is our duty to raise our voices and refuse to remain silent. And that is exactly what we're doing here tonight. So please join us after the readings and reception outside in front of the Goethe Institute building, which is illuminated in the Ukrainian colors. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Pierce, co-editor of AGNI, and want to thank our partners, of course, the Goethe Institute Boston, the German Consulate, and the Transnational Literature Series, which focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature and works in translation, and is supported by the independent bookstore Brookline Booksmith. We'll be alternating from Ukrainian writers to the other writers here in Boston. Each participant's bio note is available in the chat or in the printed program. AGNI's founder, Askold Melnyczuk, the nexus of everything here today, wrote an old world, new world novel entitled What is Told that has to be one of the great creative acts of the Ukrainian diaspora. Born in New Jersey, he has kept up and also built strong ties. The first translations from Ukrainian appeared in his now 50-year-old magazine back in issue 3. His commitment has become our commitment and is why we're all here. When I was a kid, like everyone, I wanted to be equal to the moments that might come to me. The Cold War was on, and for some reason I thought I might have to make a parachute landing at some point. Specifically, I feared getting stuck in a tree. So as a 12-year-old, I put on a full parachute halter and had my parents hoist me up on the branch of a sycamore tree and then leave. My father did as promised, but I later learned, actually after her death, that my mother had stayed behind. She had snuck back and waited in the bushes to see if her son would be okay, while I tried to prove to myself that I could survive. Ukrainians have been put into these situations that we all fear, and no one is waiting behind the tree. Ukraine is fighting its war and also our war for us, fighting back against an encroachment that greed and complacency here in the United States and in Europe have allowed to worsen. An encroachment of authoritarianism, of degradation of the vote and of the rule of law that democracies globally seem to be waking up to with shame. That Ukraine, though imperfectly, pushed back in the Maidan Revolution in 2014 when they successfully rid themselves of Viktor Yanukovych, Putin's henchman. Ukrainians are a bulwark and have been, and we need to honor and support their work and the suffering that commitment has caused and is causing them. Ready. American complacency is a terrible risk. The Afghan writer Qais Akbar Omar wrote to me this morning, Some people believe that Ukrainians are not only fighting the Russians for their country and freedom, but they are also fighting to save Europe. Similarly, in the 80s, Afghans were convinced that they were not only fighting the Soviets for their freedom, but they were also fighting for the world, trying to rescue humanity from the claws of the Soviet Union and communism. Indeed, when the Soviet Union dissolved, everyone forgot Afghanistan until 9/11 happened. This is our history as Americans. We cannot allow it to repeat, and we need to face the damage it has left behind elsewhere. So to them, the Ukrainian writers here with us today, we're humbly with you. We're listening, and we want to be part of ensuring that you remain visible and audible. First with us from Lviv, Ukraine, is Victoria Amelina.
Hey everyone. Hi everyone, I'm so happy to be here tonight for me. I lived in Boston. I actually lived in Brookline, and Brookline Booksmiths bookstore was my favorite bookstore at the time in 2019 and 2022. Thank you all so much for being with me and with Ukraine during those terrible times. And I would like to ask you also to stay with Ukraine, not for a day, not for a week, not for a month, because I think the fight will be long. And please stay with us till our victory or till we all are dead, because these are two options we have. And I will be reading from my new unfinished novel about the war. I simply wanted to tell you about the light, how I miss those patterns that the sun once painted on the kitchen floor when we were kids. Indeed, that's all I was going to tell you, Lily. But then I just couldn't stop. I kept talking until I told the whole story, everything you have missed. I kept whispering like a radio station that people only listen to by accident. You know, like the one our grandpa ran. New York Radio was its name. Everyone made fun of it, even you. I am like this lonely radio station now. People overhear my murmurs and give me those looks which Grandpa eventually got used to, but I kept noticing them for him. Grandpa would be proud of me now. I too don't care what others think of me anymore. Wherever I go, I have to describe everything to you, Lily. I've been talking to you ever since you vanished, and I wandered the streets, examining patterns of light on the cracked asphalt, as if they could bring you back. I kept uttering your name when looking into abandoned houses' windows, startled by my reflection that looked like yours. I felt you near me when asking the stray dogs, like a child, have you seen my sister? A young woman like me, only prettier, with much longer hair and a motorcycle helmet under her arm. I didn't dare to ask people, not even once. The dogs just ran away as if they could smell disloyalty, the trait betrayed animals should despise the most. I imagine what you think of me, and you're right. Your sister turned out to be a coward. I had let you down and then wasn't really trying to save you. Moreover, I stopped your mother from searching. It wasn't difficult, as she was so weak, unprepared, and invariably drunk after you had disappeared. She would get herself into trouble just like you did. She's still pretty, you know, despite all the vodka, as brave as ever. If I had let her, she would have done the most reckless things in an attempt to save you. But would it help? Your mother has brought me up, but I'm not your kind. I'm different. I'm cautious, I'm overthinking, I'm indecisive. I cannot drive a motorbike like you do, or did. This inability is the very reason why, after you got your shiny Harley from Mr. God knows who, I worked my ass off to buy the old Ford and dared to drive the car at least. I blamed you when I had crashed it stupidly, scared by a glamorous Mercedes signaling fiercely to get everyone out of the way. I just don't belong on the road. Or there's no road for cowards like me in Ukraine. I went to the bar you had worked in after dropping out of university. The waitresses, friends of yours, and the men, your admirers, all wearing black despite the hot weather, and those new aliens wearing camouflage jackets and guns, looked at me as if they all knew what had happened. I froze for a moment. I came there to ask if anyone could please help me find you. But amidst the unusual silence, I only asked, "Do I look like a ghost?" Then I ran away, not waiting for them to answer. "I'm sorry, Lily. I was never looking for you, but for a sign that the city would bring you back, like the surf should bring back lost toys to a child scared to go into the sea." There was no sign, just the sound of the distant shelling and howling, just the rumors that girls and women who have disappeared in the occupied city of Donetsk would better be dead. Are you dead? Thank you so much for listening. Thank you again for your support. Sorry, I forgot that we have to introduce, of course, the next readers, and after me will be reading actually a wonderful writer and editor based in Boston, Shuchi Saraswat.
Thank you, Victoria. My name is Shuchi Saraswat, and I'm honored to be here with you all today. I will be reading an excerpt from an essay by the late Lebanese writer H Auden. The essay is titled "To Be in a Time of War," and she wrote it in response to the US bombing of Iraq in 2003. She was living in California at the time. In an introduction to the essay, she writes, "Few had ever been to Iraq, and fewer were those ready to consider the destruction of Iraq in terms of human and cultural loss. I was numb with apprehension, and it happened that at some moment, sitting at my table, detached from my environment, projected to an east of my own mind and alienated from myself, I took paper and ink and started to write To Be in a Time of War." This reading is especially for Ukrainians in the diaspora who are experiencing from afar the Russian invasion and the ongoing destruction of their ancestral lands and people. To rise early, to hurry down to the driveway, to look for the paper, take it out of its yellow bag, to read on the front page, war, to notice that war takes half a page, to feel a shiver down the spine, to tell that that's it, to know that they dared, that they jumped the line, to read that Baghdad is being bombed, to envision a rain of fire, to hear the noise, to be heartbroken, to stare at the trees, to go up slowly while reading, to come back to the front page, read war again, to look at the word as if it were a spider, to feel paralyzed, to look for help within oneself, to know helplessness, to pick up the phone, to give up, to get dressed, to look through the windows, to suffer from the day's beauty, to hate to death the authors of such crimes, to realize that it's useless to think, to pick up the purse, to go down the stairs, to see people smashed to a pulp, to say, yes, indeed, the day is beautiful, to not know anything, to go on walking, to take notice of people's indifference toward each other. To have lunch, to ask for a beer, to give one's order, to drink, eat, and pay. To leave, to reach home, to find the key, to enter, to wait, to think about the war, to glance at the watch, to put on the news, to listen to the poison distilled by the military correspondents, to get a headache, to eat dry biscuits, to put the radio back on, to hear bombs falling on Baghdad, to listen to ambulances, to go out on the deck, to look at the lengthening shadows on the grass, to count a few dead flies on the pane, to go to the table and to look at the mail, to feel discouraged, to drink some water, to not understand the wind, to wonder if the human race is not in chaos, to wish to blow up the planet, to admire those who are marching against the war. To hear a war from far away for others, to bomb, to eliminate a country, blow up a civilization, destroy the living, to exit from one idea to enter another, to go, to cross the Golden Gate, to enter San Francisco, to stop at the light, to enjoy the luminosity of the green, to be on Market Street, to see too many policemen, to be told to keep going, to see young men being arrested at the end of the march, to measure tension in the air, to seek Valencia, to go all the way to Connecticut Street and park the car, to enter through the gate of CCAC, to sit in a room which is dark, to listen to a poet, then to another, speak about a time gone. To stop at the gas station and fill up the tank, to go uphill, peek at Mount Tamalpais, to take a rest, breathe, contemplate, to find a path and walk on wet grounds, to enjoy the enormous variety of the shades of green on the mountain, to raise one's eyes to the sky and bring them back on the horizon to compare the different grays of the sky, to try to speak to the clouds, to say, yes, it's impossible, to linger on the mystery of communication, to bemoan its absence, to say it's okay, then not to believe oneself, to think of the morning news, to be horrified, to despise, to hate, to empty one's head of overflowing emotions, to regret that evil exists, to blame oneself for the existence of evil, to want to forget about it and not be capable of so doing, to wrap oneself with death. To turn the page without moving into a new life, to put on the radio, to listen and to be hit in the face with much poison, to curse the hour, the fire, the deluge and hell, to lose patience, to lynch misfortune, to prevent the trajectory of inner defeat from reaching the center, to resist, to stand up, to raise the volume, to learn that the marches against the war are growing in number, to admit that human nature is multifaceted, to know that war is everywhere, to admit that some do win, to drink some water, to turn in circles, to pretend that one is not spent out, to believe it, to pretend, to discuss with one's own heart, to talk to it, to quiet it down, if possible, to curse the savagery of the technologically powered new crusades, to remain in doubt, to come out of it in triumph. Thank you. And reading next will be Katarina Mihalitzina.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this event. Thank you all for being there for us, with us this evening, and not only this evening. And before I start reading, I would like to tell you a short story that happened to me as a volunteer. Sometimes I met people on the train station in Lviv, which is we call rather safe place right now in Ukraine, and the people come here from mostly eastern regions of Ukraine, and it was a family of 2 moms, sisters, and 5 children. The youngest was like a year and a half, the oldest was 15, and in between was 2 boys. And when my husband came to meet them and to bring them to the Polish border by car, the boy, who was like 10 years old, shook my husband's hand and told, "Hello, my name is Leonid, and I am the defender of all these women. My father stayed at my native town to protect it, and now I'm protecting these women too. So thank you for all the support we got and still getting and would get from you. And let's be defenders for each other. Let's stay together in what we have right now, this terrible situation." I'll write you 2 poems. One was written quite earlier, and the other was written on the 21st of February, just before the war started. So a one-woman protest of a Crimea Tatar mother. I came to you, wall, and I'm talking to you. I will call you not a wailing wall, but a wall of obstinacy, of the words still remaining. Standing by you, I don't really know who of us leans on who's alive and who's made of stone, and if stone is always about the strength. I see the nests of grass listening to the sun. I see a twig of acacia kissed by the breeze and an ant pass. down from the ground and up to the horizon that my mom always called an angel's collarbone, a bone of tenderness and great sorrow. I no longer have a mom, and there is no tenderness anymore, only sorrow like the horizon. You'll never run over it. You'll never run over it. You'll never run over it, for I am not an ant. I am a woman with a poster, the only one in the entire endless street. But I came to you, wall, and I am talking to you. I will call you not a wailing wall, but a wall of obstinacy, of the words still remaining. My son is not a terrorist. My son is not a terrorist. Give my son back to me. And the other one, son, warding day. Mom, where the war comes from? He asks in a quiet. And then without a break, the war is a disaster, right? It has come in for something like, you know, for naughtiness. She feels like her head was struck with an iron baculus. The carpet was pulled from under her brain from the brain pin. Where are you taking this kid? We must have drawn some straws, Mom, and picked the wrong one from the tote bag of God. Maybe we wanted to summit the sky, but somehow we shouldn't, like the Babylonian did. You know, their tower was caused to fall, you know, I heard in school. And she keeps her tears back with all her gall. She's silent and strains for air with the words unvoiced. Mom, tell me, the wars can also be paid for? He breathes piece of window misty and draws there the shape. This is Crimea, Donetsk, inviolate, aren't they, Mom? They are untouched and ours. Mom, is this so? Yes? Straining for air with words now, she says, untouchable. He put the two-colored flag in the midst of the window drawing. And where have you been taken, kid? This is so unchildish wording. Thank you very much for the attention and for your support. And the next one, the writer, a magnificent one, was who wrote the book Voices of America, and he is called E.C. Osondu.
Hi, everyone. I feel very privileged to be reading tonight. I'll be reading two poems by a poet from Nigeria. Christopher Kibbu was his name. And, you know, Nigeria is a country where if you threw a stone into the crowd, it's most likely to land on a poet. And Christopher Kibbu was the foremost poet and probably the most recognized name as a poet in the country. But he was not satisfied with being a poet. When the Nigerian Civil War broke out, he signed up and decided to go to war. And within a very short time, he died. He was killed in the war. And so a lot of people were pained by this because he was not just a promising poet, he was very accomplished, writing both in the oral tradition and writing in the very modernist tradition as well. So he was a mix of both. And so a lot of people were pained. He was a contemporary of Chinua Achebe. He was Soyinka's contemporary. And people felt bad that he decided to go to war. And one writer actually wrote a novel titled The Trial of Christopher Kibbu, in which he said, you know, why would he go to war instead of using words, and found him guilty. So that was like double jeopardy, you know, found him guilty in the novel as well. So I'll be reading two poems from Christopher Kibbu, and one of them, I think both poems were written prior to the Nigerian Civil War. And one of them is, the first one is called Come Thunder. And it says, now that the triumphant march has entered the last street corners, remember, O dancers, the thunder among the clouds. Now that the laughter broken in two hangs tremulous between the teeth, remember, O dancers, the lightning beyond the earth. The smell of blood already floats in the lavender mist of the afternoon. The death sentence lies in ambush along the corridors of power. And the great fearful thing already tugs at the cables of the open air. A nebula, immense and immeasurable, a night of deep waters, an iron dream unnamed and unprintable, a path of stone. The drowsy heads of the pods in the barren farmlands witness it. The homesteads abandoned in this century's brush fire witness it. The myriad eyes of deserted corn cobs in the burning barns witness it. Magic birds with the miracle of lightning flash on their feathers. The arrows of God tremble at the gates of light. The drums of curfew pander to a dance of death. And the sacred thing in its heaven threatens with an iron mask, the last lighted torch of the century. The second poem is titled Hurrah for Thunder. And it says, whatever happened to the elephant, hurrah for thunder. The elephant, tetrarch of the jungle, with a wave of the hand, he could pull 4 trees to the ground. His 4 mother legs pounded the earth. Wherever they treaded, the grass was forbidden to be there. Alas, the elephant has fallen. Hurrah for thunder. But already the hunters are talking about pumpkins. If they share the meat, let them remember thunder. The eye that looks down will surely see the nose. The finger that fits should be used to pick the nose. Today, for tomorrow, today becomes yesterday. How many million promises can ever fill a basket? If I don't learn to shut my mouth, I'll soon go to hell. I, Okigo, town crier, together with my iron bell. The next reader, thank you for listening. The next reader is the next reader reading from Ukraine is Marjana Savka. Thank you so much.
Dear friends, thank you for this invitation, and it's a really great honor to be here. And thank you for all your support Ukraine. We are here. I'm not only poet, I'm also publisher, and in these days, in the Bologna was the biggest book fair for children books. The stand of Ukraine was empty, and I am like a publisher. I was not there because all of us in Ukraine, all of us like small ends of this war until the victory. And I know this big work for all of us is very necessary and very important. And we will stay and stand with Ukraine and in Ukraine until the victory. I would love to read poems in translation by my friend Askold Melnyczuk. I'm very happy that many years ago I was in Boston. It was very, very nice time, and remember all of my friends from Boston with warmness. So this first poem about not our war, but about war. Baghdad night. At the level of the heart, above and below. Baghdad night, sweet and scent. On the lips, eroded names, everywhere, silence and war. At the level of the heart, the sign of the star, turning centuries to ash, gravestones, ancient scrolls, everywhere, silence and war. At the level of the heart, the world intact. Baghdad night, sweet and scent, and the want without a bottom. Baghdad silence and war. Bird catcher strange bird catcher. At the Baghdad Bazaar, baklava, the heart grows cold and colder. A bird fell dead. What do you want, my saffron beauty? A dead bird? A gold wing, morning to morning, the bird catcher twines the thin threads on his traps. You I must forgive, then ask forgiveness of myself for asking forgiveness, because I can do no other than love you. But when I die, who will there be to pray for you? And next one is the poem which was written in the first day of this war and also translated by Askold Melnyczuk. My God spends all night forming his battalions. Is a crack shot, wages wars. My God forgives my curses as he polishes his stones. My God won't hide behind my back, throws quilted covers over children. My God buys tourniquets, then lines up to give blood. My God can get a good night's sleep while the entire country is standing guard. My God allows me never to forgive and lets me call things as they are. Thank you. Thank you for all your support and your standing with Ukraine. And I would love to invite the next reader, please, John Fulton. Thank you.
Thank you, Askold, for organizing this. This is really an important event. I put together a very brief anthology of short prose pieces, some paragraphs that I hope will give us something to hold on to in this time. These are all from other writers, but the first is a paragraph from Susan Sontag's essay regarding pain of others. And I read this in a kind of spirit of observation as well as an apology for what it can sometimes feel like when we look on from a distance and from a relative place of safety at tragedies like this one. So this is from chapter 2 of Sontag's long essay. Being a spectator of calamities taking place in another country is a quintessential modern experience, the cumulative offering by more than a century and a half's worth of those professional, specialized tourists known as journalists. Wars are now also living room sights and sounds, information about what is happening elsewhere called news, features conflicts and violence. If it bleeds, it leads, runs the venerable guideline of tabloids and 24-hour headline news shows, to which the response is compassion or indignation or titillation or approval as each misery heaves into view. The next piece is from the English writer Ian Mcunum. In the early 1990s, a long time ago, when I was in my early 20s, I was living in Berlin and the wall had just come down. And it was an extremely exciting time to be there. Suddenly, you could hop on a train and go to these countries that we'd been told were our enemies. And many of the citizens from the former East Bloc were traveling for the first times in their lives outside of their countries. And there was just a kind of energy that was unexpected and unique, nothing like it I'd ever experienced before. And It's in the hope that we return to that kind of free flow that I read this excerpt from Mcunum's novel Black Dogs, which is a meditation on World War II. But most of it actually happens in the late 1980s. All you need to know about these paragraphs is that these characters are two Englishmen who have heard what seems to be happening in Berlin and have left London last minute to go there and experience it. I was hesitating over the obvious rejoinder as we came up to the edge of the crowd. 2,000 or 3,000 had gathered in hope of seeing the wall come down at its most important symbolic point. On the 12-foot-high concrete blocks that straddled the approach to the gate, a line of nervous young East German soldiers were standing at ease, facing west. They were wearing their service revolvers tucked away out of sight in the small of their backs. An officer walked up and down in front of the line, smoking and watching the crowd. Behind the soldiers rose the illuminated, flaking facade of the Brandenburg Gate, with a flag of the German Democratic Republic just stirring. Barriers held the crowd back, and the moans of disappointment must have been for the West Berlin police, who were positioning their vans in front of the concrete blocks. As we arrived, someone tossed a full beer can at one of the soldiers. It flew high and fast, trailing white foam picked out by the overhead lights. And as it passed over the young soldier's head, there were immediate shouts of disapproval from the crowd and calls in German for no violence. The spread of sounds made me realize that there were dozens of people up in the trees. It was not difficult to push our way to the front. Now we were among it. The crowd was more civilized, more varied than I had thought. Small children sat on their parents' shoulders with a view as good as Bernard's. 2 students were selling balloons and ice cream. An old man with dark glasses and a white cane stood still with his head cocked, listening. A wide space had been left around him. When we arrived at the barrier, Bernard pointed to where a West Berlin police officer was in conversation with an East German army officer, discussing crowd control. Bernard said, halfway to unification already. And finally, I'm going to read a paragraph from Virginia Woolf's Diaries, which is a place I go to in dark times and always find something to stand on. This is from Saturday, 8 March, 1941. It's only days before she takes her own life, so she's obviously not well, and yet there's a lot of hope here, and I think too a kind of confirmation that it's important in times like these to be writers and to write. So Saturday, 8 March. No, I intend no introspection. I mark Henry James's sentence. Observe perpetually. Observe the oncome of age. Observe greed. Observe my own despondency. By that means it becomes serviceable, or so I hope. I insist upon spending this time to the best advantage. I will go down with my colors flying. This, I see, verges on introspection, but doesn't quite fall in. Suppose I bought a ticket at the museum, biked in daily, and read history. Suppose I selected one dominant figure in every age and wrote round and about. Occupation is essential. And now with some, I find that it's 7 o'clock and must cook dinner, haddock and sausage meat. I think it is true that one gains a certain hold on sausage and haddock by writing them down. Thank you. Next up is Yuliya Musakovska.
Good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be here tonight. The idea of today's event is to speak as artists to artists, but also as humans speaking to humans. So what I'd like to say is what Russia is doing in Ukraine right now is a crime against humanity. And this atrocity can only be stopped by the joint effort of the global community, the community of humans. So please continue standing with us, standing with Ukraine. Tonight, I will read 3 poems from my latest book, The God of Freedom, that came out last year. Olena Jennings and I co-translated this from Ukrainian. Such love it is, a hot lump in your throat. It is without any half-tones or relative meanings. Loved not half-heartedly, but with the full sun and sea. It is loved hyacinth-like, violet-like, and unconditionally. It is so uncovered and raw, like an early morning. It is so striking, you can't tell if it heals or wounds. It has been promised. Your knees go weak and your armor is broken. It is like a long-awaited train stop that you missed on purpose. It is like a roar and a voice amidst it saying, it's just a thunderstorm. It is like a street musician that has been slaughtered at Pixamcha. It is like round boats and rivers that have gone shallow, like 155 children deprived of their father's care, like the names of the lost places which you are never tired of saying, like the highest grace and the worst curse, like the black grass, bird nests turned to ashes and the whisper of the void. Such love it is, which has grown deep into you and will never let go. Oh, my Lord, adorned by roses, clothed in spiderwebs and dew, I will bring to you past chasms and fallen trees, 10 bullets in between my ribs. How did they appear? Fruit of what land? Who raised them and nourished them so fully? They soar off, drunk with impunity, with their eyes called stingers. Oh, my Lord, so ardent and disheartened, wearing thorns above your high forehead. How does it feel to walk wearing a crown, barefoot through the ravaged land? The wind will cast a ball into your face. These are smells of something human, burning. Oh, my Lord, shine and bloom abundantly while inertia is driving us forth, while numbers multiply in the matrix, while it's still early morning. Sleep, my Lord. Let us hold on, but what's left to hold on to? Rose petals, raindrops, and thorns. And the last one. What's rattling in the bag? Bones. My bones, but not all of them. My brother stole 3 bones. He sold 2 of them at the market and buried one in his garden. An apple tree will grow from that bone. Each apple with my face will speak to my brother. Why did you do this, older brother? What did you kill me for? taking the bones from my body, sewing it shut with a coarse thread. Put me into a bag, not letting them bury me for 3 days. It is because your wife is prettier, your song is louder, your soil is richer. The apple tree in your garden is taller. Give me your wife, your land, tie your song in a knot in your throat. You're not a brother to me, not an honest enemy, not a man, not a beast, a bag full of bones. Your wife will come outside and take a bite of an apple. She will fall dead. Your children will come out, they will take a bite and fall lifelessly. The sun will rise and burn your house to the ground, sowing the land with ashes. What's rattling in the bag? Apples, so very sweet. Thank you. And the next one reading will be Andrea Cohen.
This is a poem by Taha Muhammad Ali, Meeting at an Airport. You asked me once on our way back from the mid-morning trip to the spring, what do you hate and who do you love? And I answered from behind the eyelashes of my surprise, my blood rushing like the shadow cast by a cloud of starlings. I hate departure. I love the spring and the path to the spring, and I worship the middle hours of morning. And you laughed, and the almond tree blossomed, and the thicket grew loud with nightingales. A question now 4 decades old. I salute that question's answer, and an answer as old as your departure. I salute that answer's question, and today, it's preposterous. Here we are at a friendly airport by the slimmest of chances, and we meet. Ah, Lord, we meet, and here you are asking again. It's absolutely preposterous. I recognized you, but you didn't recognize me. Is it you? But you wouldn't believe it. And suddenly you burst out and asked, if you're really you, what do you hate and who do you love? And I answered, my blood fleeing the hall, rushing in me like the shadow cast by a cloud of starlings. I hate departure, and I love the spring and the path to the spring, and I worship the middle hours of morning. And you wept, and flowers bowed their heads, and doves in the silk of their sorrow stumbled. A prayer that will be answered by Anna Kaminska. Lord, let me suffer a lot, and then let me die. Allow me to walk through silence. Let nothing, not even fear, linger after me. Make the world go on as it always has. Let the sea continue to kiss the shore. Let grass still remain green so a little frog could find shelter in it. And someone could bury his face and weep his heart out. Make a day so bright it seems there's no more suffering. And let my poem be transparent as a window pane against which a straying bee hits its head. Nazim Hikmet. It's this way. I stand in the advancing light, my hands hungry, the world beautiful. My eyes can't get enough of the trees. They're so hopeful, so green. A sunny road runs through the mulberries. I'm at the window of the prison infirmary. I can't smell the medicines. Carnations must be blooming nearby. It's this way. Being captured is beside the point. The point is not to surrender. Some briefly poetry of mine, tiny poems really. Wrecking Ball. Its offices are thin air. On days off, it still goes in. Wrecking balls are workaholics. They hang around up there. And even the idea of big sky crumbles. After the accident, we had the phrase, after the accident. Also this, before the accident. We had a drawer marked before and after. And after and before happenings, we'd add atrocities and incidents and the wild asters, someone before and after keeps leaving. Guide to becoming a human shield. Live near spears. Fellow traveler. She went everywhere with an empty suitcase. You never know when you'll need to leave swiftly with nothing. Night. Someone was talking quietly of lanterns, but loud enough to light my way. And next is Volodymyr Dibrova.
I came late. I don't know what's the procedure. What's the format? So if you can, somebody tell me. So is it about speaking, 5 to 7 minutes of fame? Right. Okay, so anything I like, right? Ooh, what a revelation. All right, so I hope I'm presented here as a writer, and what writers do, they perceive the world like a treasure, or like a stream, or like a treasure trove of stories, you know, with twists and turns of the plot, and above all, rhythms. So I brought a couple of stories here. One of them is actually a geopolitical treatise. And the main point of that work is that the events of February 24th are of the same magnitude as the events of September 11th, 2001, because the whole world order was established after 1945 with its international organizations, military alliances, telephone hotlines, they're all gone. And there's no way this Humpty Dumpty could be put back again. And so this is one of the conclusions. And the other point of this treatise is that actually a couple of jabs at American academic or Slavic community that still perceive for them Russia is a country of Bolshoi and Tolstoyevsky. Well, while in fact it's the land of thugs who 100 plus years ago just crushed that culture and put on their garments and now masquerade as the lawful heirs to that culture. So I think it's a big mistake. And if you don't trust me, read Andrei Platonov or Vladimir Sorokin. So another story that I'm going to present is sort of modeled on David versus Goliath. And it's full of bravery, sacrifice, and what else? An utter contempt towards a crowd of onlookers, hypocritical, impotent, and cowardly. And the third story is the story of my family. So like my mother, my son, my sister are still in Kiev. My wife's father is in Kiev. And this story is full of anxiety, constant telephone calls, and very poignant and a real weepy. You'd love it. But my fourth story is actually a poem. I don't really write. I'm sorry, I love it. I just love it. I don't really like poetry, but number one, it came natural. And number three, it encapsulates everything that I think about that thing. And believe you me, it's not like a box of chocolates. So it's called Dark Matter. Are you ready? Good. Look, the divide that shields us from the underworld. We're not meant to know it's there. Life's hard enough to be mindful of this other world. But then something awful happened. There's been a breach. Like a ruptured membrane, like a wound with hatred and vile lies gushing from it. When it touches the weak-hearted, it sucks out their minds and wills. When it touches the strong-hearted, it shakes them to the core. Yes, it defies the basic laws of physics, but here we are. Watch out. Whatever this substance is, it's extremely toxic. Stay away from it. Don't let it touch you. We've yet to come up with a proper name for it. And it's so damn difficult. We must find it though, or it will slither away unpunished. But what word can capture these violent spasms of incandescent hatred? Or this dark matter of lies, so dense, no truth can penetrate it. Don't lose heart. Keep searching for it. This is totally up to us now. Once you give it a name, you'll be able to see right through it. Thank you.
I'm Jane Unrue. I'm honored to be reading from the work of Mariana Kyonovska, an award-winning Ukrainian writer, translator, literary scholar, and public figure whose works have been translated into 18 languages. She is the author of more than 12 books of poetry, prose, and literary translation, and is winner of the Vilenica International Literary Festival and the CEI Fellowship and the Gloria Artist Medal for Merit to Culture in Poland. In 2020, she received the Taras Shevchenko Prize for her collection, The Voices of Babinyar. The English translation of this work by Oksana Lutsyshyna and Max Rosachinsky is being published this year by the Ukrainian Research Institute at Harvard. I will be reading from this translation tonight. It should be said, though, Babinyar, a ravine on the northern edge of Kyiv, is one of the largest World War II mass graves in Europe, the site of a two-day massacre in September of 1941, one of the largest mass shootings during the Holocaust. According to the Germans' own reports, they had shot 33,771 Jews there. Over the next 2 years, they would continue to use the site as a killing ground, murdering another 70,000 persons, by some accounts 100,000, by others 150,000, including Romani people, psychiatric patients, prisoners of war, and other civilians, and more Jews, before the Soviets took control of the city again in November of 1943. As the German armies retreated, the Nazis attempted to hide all evidence of the slaughter. The Soviets attempted to flood the ravine with mud and bury the truth. There were plans to build a stadium there, leading to Yevtushenko's 1961 poem, Babi Yar. At the site of such atrocities and of such concealment, erasure, and silence, there was no form of monument until a small obelisk referring to Soviet victims without mentioning the Jews was constructed in 1966. A television tower was put up adjacent to the site in 1970. In 1974, a 50-foot memorial statue was erected. 50 years after the massacre, the identity of the victims was recorded on a large menorah monument by the newly independent Ukrainian government. 23 days ago, a Russian airstrike on the adjacent television tower caused damage to the site of Babinyar and drew global condemnation. According to sources, 5 people were killed in the strike. In her introduction to the translated edition of the Voices of Babinyar, poet and scholar Polina Barskova writes, quote, "The voices of Kyonovska's poems belong to various participants in the tragedy, Jews, Ukrainians, and Germans, to those already in the fateful ravine and those still walking to it. They belong to the murderers and their helpers, as well as the city dwellers who observe the tragic procession from afar. All these voices are mediated through the lens of the contemporary poet who takes upon herself an immensely complicated mission of talking for the dead," end quote. Kyonovska's translators write, "The German forces entered the city on September 19th. By the end of September, 33,771 of Kyiv's Jews had been executed. The voices of Kyonovska's poems tell the story of those 10 days as if they were months, even years. Time slows down, turns viscous, clings, and enfolds. The voices grow deeper, become repetitive, break up, like on a jamming audio tape," end quote. I'll be reading 2 poems from this translation of Mariana Kyonovska's remarkable book. Each poem in the collection is written from the first-person perspective. It could even be said that in some ways, the subject of the book is the first-person perspective. I'll start from the beginning. Eyes filled with tears so dense they won't flow. Bitterer than salt, harder than stone. I try to build a home out of all that's here and beyond. Back in my childhood, the sky, the sandbox, the toys I owned, I try to make up a mother, a Hava who would be mine, who'd wash my hair for me, who'd be there to name the things in the shop window, staples like bread and milk, delicacies and dried flowers, the gliding joy of the ice rink. Nothing saves anymore. Nothing helps except maybe tears breaking through what remains of the body, its shallow surface. To survive, I must carry them in my suitcases, in my veins. Heavy mechanisms of invention and wings and wings. Only now can I speak of this. I would never have guessed it. Crematorium is a light. Now that eternity passed and a bit more time in the big and the little dippers, I return to my childhood. And once again, for the first time, I pet a cat that Tato brought over from the neighbors. Baba Nekama says, let it stay. Let the two of them grow up by each other's side. Only now do I realize, witnessing for the first time, crematorium is a light that was done unto me in 1943, all-consuming and terrifying. Only now can I speak of this, or perhaps I can only still speak of this now, when in the year 1942, they shot at us with a machine gun. I managed to count up to 1,128. 1,128 walked beside me, and beside me 1,128 fell as I turned into a stick of dynamite and exploded, covering everyone with a layer of soil, only to sprout out in the middle of the ravine where water had formed a cavity. Therefore, 1,129, a prime number. I am to myself primarily. For almost 19 minutes, I turned into a number. For 1,128 seconds, I don't know whether I lived, can't recall if I breathed, came back home to a sky, to a childhood. Only now can I speak of this. Brother Levi yelled, come take a look at these cherries, shot cherry stones at me, and I shot right back at him. To this day, it hurts me inside my chest. To this day, I wrestle, rooted in, only now can I speak of this, or perhaps, and yet, only I can speak of this still, only now. First, we all walked for a long time, then we stopped. An eternity passed, and a bit more time. Then they told us that some, surprisingly, have survived. I also survived, they said, still in one piece. And now I say this, one Jew writing Holocaust after the Holocaust, only now can I speak of this. 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 For only now can I speak of this, bearing witness. Next reader is James Woods.
Reading from a favorite novel of mine by the great Albanian writer Ismael Kadari. It's probably known to several of you in the room. It's an autobiographical novel about growing up as a child in the medieval fortress town of Gjirokastër, where Kadari was born, and which had a fairly eventful, you could say, history in the Second World War. It was occupied by Italians, by Greeks, by Germans, bombed by the British, who were trying to get the Italians out. It's a lovely book, not least because it's ultimately a comic book and an optimistic one. The city survives everything. And I'm just going to read 3 passages which are from sort of choral episodes. A chorus speaks at the beginning and at the end of the book. It was a strange city and seemed to have been cast up in the valley one winter's night, like some prehistoric creature that was now clawing its way up the mountainside. Everything in the city was old and made of stone, from the streets and fountains to the roofs of the sprawling age-old houses covered with gray slates like gigantic scales. It was hard to believe that under this powerful carapace, the tender flesh of life survived and reproduced. The traveler, seeing it for the first time, was tempted to compare it to something, but soon found that impossible, for the city rejected all comparisons. In fact, it looked like nothing else. It could no more support comparison than it would allow rain, hail, rainbows, or multicolored foreign flags to remain for long on its rooftops. For they were as fleeting and unreal as the city was lasting and anchored in solid matter. It was a slanted city, set at a sharper angle than perhaps any other city on earth, and it defied the laws of architecture and city planning. The top of one house might graze the foundation of another, and it was surely the only place in the world where if you slipped and fell in the street, you might well land on the roof of a house, a peculiarity known most intimately to drunks. Yes, a very strange city indeed. In some places, you could walk down the street, stretch out your arm, and hang your hat on a minaret. Many things in it were simply bizarre, and others seemed to belong in a dream. While preserving human life rather awkwardly by means of its tentacles and its stony shell, the city also gave its inhabitants a good deal of trouble, along with scrapes and bruises. That was only natural, for it was a stone city, and its touch was rough and cold. No, it was not easy to be a child in that city. And then the novel ends with the author who has spent a good deal of his adult life as an exile in Paris, returning to the city. A very long time later, I came back to the gray, immemorial city. My feet timidly trod the spine of its stone-paved streets. They bore me up. You recognized me, you stones. Often striding along wide, lighted boulevards in foreign cities, I somehow stumble in places where no one ever trips. Passers-by turn in surprise, but I always know it's you. You emerge from the asphalt all of a sudden, and then sink back down straight away. And then I thought I would just read a speech, it's just 50 words or so, an extract of a speech that Kadari gave on receiving the Man Booker International Prize in 2006, because it seems very appropriate for this occasion this evening. So this is a few words by Ismael Kadari on winning this prize in 2005. We propped each other up as we tried to write literature, as if that regime did not exist. Now and again, we pulled it off. At other times, we didn't. The idea that we could create a few mouthfuls of spiritual nourishment for our imprisoned nation filled us with joy. Let me stress this point. That modest spiritual nourishment was a kind of survival ration for our people in their prison land. And then suddenly, one day, passing through the night of dictatorship, our prison bread ended up by accident on your table in your free cities, Paris, London, New York, Madrid, Vienna, Rome. You picked up the prison loaf and inspected it with curiosity. You took a bite and found it good and reckoned it was just as edible by you who live in the free world. An Albanian writer could not have imagined any higher kind of praise being given. For him, it was a miracle of biblical proportions. Tiny, forgotten, isolated Albania, a land that had almost been buried alive, had apparently shown a sign of continuing life. Albania had signaled that though bound hand and foot by dictatorship, it hadn't yet enslaved its soul. That signal, broadcast by means of literature, and so nobly picked up by you, my dear friends, is what has made the unthinkable possible. It's that signal which made today's prize possible. Thank you. And next to speak will be Oksana Lutsyshyna.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Askold, for putting this event together, and for Goethe Institute, and for all the amazing writers and readers. And thank you for everyone who came to support us and to stand in solidarity. I will read 2 poems. Eastern Europe is a pit of death and decaying plums. I hide from it in the body of America, but sooner or later I'll slip from this light back down into that other. And we'll start talking about death, because that is our national sport, talking about death. Sad yet beautiful, hoping that the world will hear us and gasp at the beauty and sadness. My lover spreads my fingers with his own. He was educated in good old France, then America. He also studied Buddhism and erotica somewhere near the borders of Thailand. It's good to drink wine with him and chat, but not about death or Eastern Europe, because the world's a shithole and it's worthwhile to learn only one art, that of hopping from one pleasure islet to another, and not giving a damn about plague-infected continents with their corpse-eating flies. He kisses me goodnight and disappears into his dream as I lie in mine, full of summer sun and ephemeral sweetness. Mittel Europa, Zbigniew Herbert whispers in my ear. Middle Europe enters a labyrinth without a single turn, a labyrinth of fate and freshly laid brick. It enters and doesn't exit. It endures and revives, small like newly seeded grass in the evening, strong like the grandchildren of those that survived the war. When will I die? Someone asks in my still childish voice. But I don't hear the answer, because it suddenly becomes dark in this death pit where Miklos Radnoti is writing his last poem. This poem was translated into English by Oksana Lutsyshyna and Max Rosuchinsky. And the second poem I have actually read quite a few times, but it seems to be one of those that by popular demand, I keep reading again and again. And this one was translated from Ukrainian into English by Olena Jennings. Who is on my side, you ask? Who is on my side? This tree here, as if it could be against you, as if trees could be against people. A whole park of trees, a whole forest, you could say, and all are on your side, all of them. And the cat? Is the cat against you? No, the cat is on your side. This cat and all the world's cats, all on your side, all your army, nimble, yellow-eyed, and God's, yours and others and everyone in the world. Wouldn't they help you? Of course they would. They are on your side. How could they be against you? And that teacher that said thoughts are everything, what's his name? Swami Vishnudevananda, is he against you? Why waste his time? Of course, he's on your side, on your side. And the sea, what? You think the sea is against you? All its waves and pebbles and beaches, visible and invisible, everything is for you, don't doubt it. Every day and every minute, do you hear the sea roars? It says to you, I am on your side, on your side. And music, which of the notes are against you? Which of the melodies? Mozart, rappers, pianists, the Academia Byzantina, Paul McCartney? No, what are you thinking? Everyone is on your side, on your side. And there's no one against you, and there will never be. And so love, keep on loving, don't be afraid. Thank you so much. And the next poet is Robert Pinsky.
I'm Robert Pinsky. When President Zelensky spoke in Russian to the Russian people, I found great meaning in that moment. I was very moved by it. And I had two quite personal, maybe irrelevant associations. Thinking about that part of the world where I had visited, one association was to my dear friend Adam Zagajewski, the great Polish poet who died far too young about a year ago. And Adam's great poem, To Go to Lviv, To Go to Lvov. I'm thinking about the different consonants and vowels. Adam's poem, Lvov and Lviv, and we Americans try on television to think about the difference between Kiev and Kyiv. The other association was to my own naivete. As a child, growing up in New Jersey, where so many of the names that I thought of as local names were actually the names of Jews who had lived in different places. Sometimes the borders of the countries varied. So you may have lived in Belarus for a while, but then you were suddenly in Poland or in Ukraine. And the names again, the vowels and the consonants were changed. So I'll read two poems to you. A brief poem of my own introducing Adam Zagajewski's Going to Lvov. And my poem is an introduction, so I will read it first. Place names. As a child's idea of blood is a scraped knee, I heard them as New Jersey names. Mr. Sokol from Odessa, Seamus of the terracotta shoal, all day crooning prayers to himself. Hidden in those homely consonants, echoes of blood. Jerry Lewis changed from Levitch, Ukrainian for Levy. In the shul, Yosel Tarnopol, a survivor, always smiling in his bad clothes. Murder again exploding in Babinyar, that is to Babinyar, Babinyar as Kiev is to Kiev, chasms of blood in one spelled shade of pronunciation or another. As the Lvov of Adam's poem is Lviv, Mr. Levitz from Vilnius, Vilno, Vilna, instrument of cousin tongues, each tongue a familiar spirit, fanged. To dispel in air the blood-stunned music of time, the Zagajewski clarity, peaceful yet explosive. Fate saturates names. Death awaits you, he wrote, in Going to Lvov, in the name of the earth. In degrees of translation, every city a Jerusalem, every man a Jew, a city contorted, breathes the syllables of its name anew, plain as a peach, to redeem each chorus of its blood. And the word chorus to me is related to the Ukrainian president choosing to speak in Russian and saying, we're separate from you. We're not you, we're your neighbors, not your blood enemies. The idea that rather than a competitive war amongst languages or peoples, there would be a chorus for me is one of the meanings of Adam Ziyevsky's poem, To Go to Lvov, which I will read to you now. To go to Lvov. Which station for Lvov, if not in a dream, at dawn when dew gleams on a suitcase, where express trains and bullet trains are being born? To leave in haste for Lvov, night or day, in September or in March, but only if Lvov exists, if it is to be found within the frontiers and not just in my new passport. If lances of trees, of poplar and ash still breathe aloud like Indians, and if streams mumble their dark Esperanto, and grass snakes, like soft signs in the Russian language, disappear into thickets, to pack and set off, to leave without a trace at noon, to vanish like fainting maidens, and burdocks, green armies of burdocks, and below, under the canvas of a Venetian cafe, the snails converse about eternity. But the cathedral rises, you remember, so straight as Sunday, and white napkins in a bucket full of raspberries standing on the floor, and my desire, which wasn't born yet, only gardens and weeds in the amber Queen Anne cherries, and indecent Fredro. There was always too much of Lvov. No one could comprehend its burrows. Here, each stone scorched by sun. At night, the Orthodox Church's silence was unlike that of the cathedral. The Jesuits baptized plants leaf by leaf, and joy hovered everywhere, in hallways, in coffee mills revolving by themselves, in teapots, in starch, which was the first formalist, in drops of rain and thorns of roses, frozen forsythias yellowed by the window. There was so much of the world that it had to do encores over and over. The audience was in frenzy and didn't want to leave the house. My aunts couldn't have known yet that I'd resurrect them, and lived so truthfully, so trustfully, so singly. Servants, clean and ironed, ran for fresh cream inside the houses, a bit of anger and great expectation. Berzhozhsky came as a visiting lecturer. One of my uncles kept writing a poem entitled Why, dedicated to the Almighty. And there was too much of love. It brimmed the container, it burst glasses, overflowed each pond, lake, smoked through every chimney. It turned into fire, storm, laughed with lightning, grew meek, returned home, read the New Testament. It slept on a sofa beside the Carpathian rug. There was too much of love, too much of Lvov, and now there isn't any. It grew relentlessly, and the scissors cut it. Chilly gardeners, as always in May, without mercy, without love. Ah, wait till warm June comes, with soft ferns, boundless fields of summer, i.e., the reality. But scissors cut it, along the line and through the fiber. Tailors, gardeners, censors, cut the body and the wreaths. Pruning shears worked diligently, as in a child's cutout along the dotted line of a roe deer or a swan. Scissors, penknives, and razor blades of scratched, cut and shortened the voluptuous dresses of prelates, of squares and houses, and trees fell soundlessly as in a jungle, and the cathedral trembled. People bade goodbye without handkerchiefs. No tears, such a dry mouth. I won't see you anymore. So much death awaits you. Why must every city become Jerusalem and every man a Jew? And now, in a hurry, just pack always, each day, and go breathless. Go to Lvov. After all, it exists. Quiet and pure as a peach. It is everywhere. Thank you. And we will now hear closing remarks from the person to whom we all feel very, very grateful, Askold Melnyczuk.
I'd first like to add my thanks to our hosts at the Goethe Institute, Karen Uhlenschläger, Jörg Susenbach, and Nicole Mensenbach, and to our partners, Piers Alquist from the Brookline Booksmiths celebrated transnational reading series, whose founder, Shuchi Saraswat, is with us here tonight. My old friend, Bill Pierce at AGNI, for all he is doing on behalf of Ukrainian writers and Ukraine itself. To my crew at Arrowsmith, particularly Gerard Robertson, for all his help. Thanks to the illustrious American writers who have stepped up today to make this experience such a meaningful one. Above all, my heartfelt thanks to you, the writers from Ukraine. Who are reminding us by their example of the abiding importance and power of words, even as missiles continue raining down on Ukrainian cities. Finally, I want to thank all of you here in the audience this evening, as well as those of you watching online. Our goal in organizing this was to have us look at each other and to hear each other, because to be is to be perceived. And Ukraine has, for far too long, been either not seen at all, or if seen, been wildly misperceived. And that's in part because it has only rarely been allowed to speak for itself. For that, there are consequences. I'd like to say that Ukraine is the only country I know of that was dreamed into existence by a poet. Taras Shevchenko, whose birthday was celebrated a few weeks ago, was born a serf, a slave. Serfdom was abolished in the Russian Empire in 1861, 2 years before the Emancipation Proclamation. Freed from slavery by the efforts of fellow artists, Shevchenko took on himself the mission of telling the story of the indigenous people of Ukraine in their native tongue. For this, the Russian Empire punished him with decades of exile and imprisonment. His words, meanwhile, solidified and fortified the people's sense of themselves. And for that, there are also severe consequences. Because of Shevchenko's poetry, his example, poetry has always played a central role in Ukrainian culture. It's been important enough for Russia to repeatedly censor and prohibit the publication of literature written in Ukrainian. Though, as we see today, Ukraine is a cosmopolitan nation in which identity is not determined by language. The assault on Ukrainian culture reached a fever pitch under Stalin in the 30s. And I don't think there is a Ukrainian writer alive today who isn't aware of what happened during what I call the aborted Renaissance. Now, imagine American literature in the 20th century without Faulkner, without Richard Wright, without Hemingway, without Zora Neale Hurston, Willa Cather, Langston Hughes, William Carlos Williams, Countee Cullen. Without these writers, there would be no James Baldwin, no Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's unthinkable. But the unthinkable happened in Ukraine. In 1930, some 260 writers actively participated in the country's literary life. By 1938, only 36 of them remained on the scene. Surveying the fates of the missing speaks volumes about the leitmotif of that decade. Of the 224 missing in action, 17 were shot, 8 committed suicide, 175 were arrested or interred, 16 disappeared without a trace. Only 7 died of natural causes. This is what power really is: the privilege of ignoring anything you might find distasteful, writes Oksana Zabushko. My first language was Ukrainian. My parents were refugees from Przemysl, Poland, who spent 5 years in a refugee camp before receiving permission to come to this country. I can't tell you how horrifying it is for me to see their lives reprised in the 21st century. 3.5 million refugees in under a month, 10 million people displaced within the borders of the country. The consequences of Russia and Putin's evil will play out for decades. Because I can tell you what I'm sure many of you already know for yourselves: a war isn't over when the treaties are signed. Its consequences continue playing out over decades and generations. In the last few years in the United States, we've seen all too vividly that our own civil war isn't over yet. My first language was Ukrainian, but my native tongue is English. All that I have is a voice, wrote H Auden in one of his most celebrated poems, September 1st, 1939, written shortly after the start of the Second World War. All that I have is a voice. May not sound like much during a war, and yet it is, on closer inspection, so much more than we might possibly imagine. Auden's poem goes on. All that I have is a voice to undo the folded lie. In this case, the lie he's talking about is multiple. It's both the lie of the sensuous man in the street, the cocoon in which so many of us choose to wrap ourselves because we can't bear too much reality. And in the case of Ukraine, it's a century of lies Russia has propagated about itself and about Ukraine. All that I have is a voice, but a voice can work wonders. And so I'd like to close this evening with a poem by the Polish poet Czesław Miłosz in a translation by the poet and Robert Pinsky. The poem is Incantation. Human reason is beautiful and invincible. No bars, no barbed wire, no pulping of books, no sentence of banishment can prevail against it. It establishes universal ideas in language and guides our hands so we write truth and justice with capital letters, lie and oppression with small. It puts what should be above things as they are, is an enemy of despair and a friend of hope. It does not know Jew from Greek or slave from master, giving us the estate of the world to manage. It saves austere and transparent phrases from the filthy discord of tortured words. It says that everything is new under the sun, opens the congealed fist of the past. Beautiful and very young are philosophia and poetry, her ally in the service of the good. As late as yesterday, nature celebrated their birth. The news was brought to the mountains by a unicorn and an echo. Their friendship will be glorious. Their time has no limit. Their enemies have delivered themselves to destruction. Thank you all for your time, your attention, your spirit. Thank you all here. Thank you all there. Thank you.